This morning we're going to talk about the weather. Well, it's something that we take for granted, isn't it? Day by day we wake up in the morning, and if it's sunny, well, it's sunny. And if it's raining like it is today, well, it's raining. There's not much that we can do about that. But I want us to look at a little bit deeper into this matter of the weather this morning, because there's so many of these things in life that we take for granted have exceptionally deep meaning if we really go into it and we want to think behind what we can actually see. And so this morning we're going to talk about being weather smart, understanding why weather happens. And the first thing I want us to bring to our attention is this little scripture reading as an adjunct to what we have already read, which says, and it's found in 3 different places in the Bible, as you can see here, Ecclesiastes, Psalms, and Ecclesiastes again. The wind goes towards the south and turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. The clouds poured out water. The skies sent out a sound. Your arrows also flashed about. And all the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. That last little section there, all the rivers run into the sea, etc., we're going to have a whole sermon dedicated to that concept one of these days. But today we're going to talk particularly about the wind and the clouds and rain and things like that and see where they come from. Well, temperature is a form of energy. The temperature of an object is the amount of heat or coldness it contains within itself. As you can see, temperature rises from a cold state to a warm state if you put heat to it. The degree of heat or cold is determined by such things as the physical nature of the object and the degree of heating or cooling that is applied to it. This is all very basic and very just obvious, but we need to understand these things to get a background. Temperature is measured in degrees Fahrenheit or in degrees Celsius, and temperature has a lot to do with the weather. God controls the weather. Now, this is the thought that I want us to get first firmly fixed in our mind. Remember when we studied about fetal development, we discovered that a baby's development in its mother's womb is not just a biological process that God set in motion and He stands back and watches. No, God is involved in the formation of a little fetus in its mother's womb. It's like that with the weather. We might think that what's happening outside there now is just happenstance. It just happens to be a rainy day. Just because the weather, the atmospheric conditions were right, that's why it's raining today. No. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. Now I want to bring out a very, very interesting principle here. God could not make a promise like that unless He controlled it. I want us to get that idea in our mind. Unless God actually controls all those things, He could not guarantee them. I think that's pretty obvious, but we could miss that point. In other words, weather doesn't just happen. Weather is controlled and guided by God. Now, let's have a look at a basic principle here. The earth does not sit straight up in relationship to the sun. Now, there is no real north or south in the universe. That is a terminology as a place situation, if you like, that we have put upon the earth. But when it comes to space, there is really no north and south. Everything is just everything. But as far as the earth is concerned, if you were to take a line through the earth vertically like this, as for what we would consider to be vertical, in relationship to the sun, you'll find that the earth is tilted 23.5 degrees, which means when it's over here at the winter solstice, the sun is more directly on the southern hemisphere than it is on the northern hemisphere, because you can see it's tilted this way. Now, that means 2 things. First of all, there's a greater distance between Alaska up here and the sun's surface than there is, say, at the equator or somewhere on the southern hemisphere here, as far as the sun is concerned. And also, it has to go a further distance through the atmosphere in order to strike the ground or to strike us where we are here in Petersburg. Now, when it gets down to the summer solstice, the opposite applies. You have the northern hemisphere here has got more direct sunlight than the southern hemisphere, and you have summer here. This is, of course, talking about the northern hemisphere. Even though the temperature radiated from the sun might be virtually equal over a given area, the temperature reflected back into the atmosphere will not necessarily be the same over that area, because green wheat and green corn, for example, reflect back cooler temperatures than, say, the asphalt on a parking lot or a sandy tract of open land. If any of us, I know that Dave will be able to relate to this, if you fly a model, at least a small light aeroplane, you can find this because you find a very bumpy flight path if you fly over tin roofs, asphalt parking lots over in town, over a parking lot around associated with a store or something like that. You'll find thermals, but then next to it there may be a long patch of grass or trees, and you'll find there you don't have that uprising air to push you up in the air, give you a bumpy ride. So that's very obvious, and it's very, very easy to see. Now, evaporation is also caused by temperature. This anomaly is most pronounced in the difference in temperature absorbed and retained by the land as opposed to that which oceans absorb and retain. Because of evaporation, water tends to lose more of its heat than the land, for the land, being solid and firm, is not subject to the same degree of evaporation. On the land, it is only the moisture in rivers, lakes, and plant life that evaporates. That's a picture taken from my aeroplane. That's Lake Michigan over there. And you can see it was clear skies above, but over the lake there, the water was evaporating from the surface and forming clouds above it. Now this is, again, we're building up, and I have very, very long introductions, so just bear with me with the introduction. The elements that affect weather patterns. Temperature variations. These are caused by differences in heat absorption and reflection between different areas of the Earth's surface. We've already explained that. Pressure differential. These are caused by temperature variations. Now, just let's think about that for a minute. Where you have colder air, the air is more dense. Where you have warmer air, the air is less dense. Now, when air is dense, it is heavier than the less dense air. Now, that may sound like an obvious thing to state, but very often we can just miss some of these things that are so obvious. So the pressure differentials, these are caused by temperature variations. Warm air rises, and it has to have air coming in to take its place, but it does cause in the process a low pressure region. Where you've got the more dense, cooler air, it's heavy, and you have a higher pressure region. We're going to talk about that in just one moment. Now, the Coriolis effect, this is the circular movement of the wind caused by the rotation of the earth. Think about this. We're going to just talk about this for a little bit. Here you have a high pressure region. These numbers here are millibars. You can see here right at the center of this high pressure region here, you've got 1,028 millibars. And over here at the center of the low pressure region, you've got 1,012. So there's a higher pressure here. Now, when you get that higher pressure, the air pushes outwards. It wants to get out because the air is trying to push down, so it moves out. However, the earth is rotating, so it doesn't just push straight out. It doesn't just come straight out like this. It curves because the earth is spinning, and I'm going to explain in a moment why that is a fact. But now notice something. When it comes out in a clockwise direction from a high pressure region, and then it goes into the low pressure region, which draws it in because the air is rising and it's got to have air to take its place. So it pulls the air in from the high pressure region into the low pressure region. But now notice this. The direction of rotation in the low pressure region is counterclockwise. And I'm going to show you a beautiful illustration of this in just a moment. Now, this is why you have this rotation. You have a spinning disc with, say, a piece of white on a spinning disc. And the direction of rotation is this way. It's turning this way. And you have a pen or a pencil that moves from the center across the surface of the disc. Because the disc is turning, you don't draw a straight line on that disc, but the line will be shaped something like this. It will be curved because as the pen moves, so the disc is turning. That's the Coriolis effect that the rotation of the earth has upon the direction of the winds. And you remember in that little scripture that we read, the wind goes to the south and it turns around and comes again. That's the Coriolis effect, which is the cause of those changes in weather patterns. Now, this is a typical weather system that you would find in the United States. You have a low pressure region here, you have cold air coming down from Alaska and Canada, and that forms what is called a cold front. It's colder air. Coming up from the Gulf of Mexico, you have warm air here, and that will form a warm front. Now notice the direction that the winds take. Counterclockwise, because it's a low pressure region. Now that's how you symbolize a warm front on a chart, and that's how you symbolize a cold front. Now what happens sometimes is you'll find the cold front coming down from the north catches up with the warm front, and it forms what is known as an occluded front. And sometimes it'll actually form a stationary front. It'll become stationary, and you'll have days where the weather just seems to stay the same. It's raining and it's overcast. That means that the front has actually come to a standstill, and it just continues to rain or do whatever it's going to do over the top of you. Now, this is a picture of what we're actually talking about here. You can see the air has come down from Alaska and Canada here, and it's formed a cold front. And you've got the warm front, you've got the warm air coming up from the Gulf of Mexico here, and that has formed a warm front. And there's our low pressure region there, and the air is flowing around it that way. The winds are flowing around it that way. Now you'll find here, in the front of a cold front, you have showery type of precipitation, much like what we've got today. In front of the warm front, it's more steady precipitation and heavier rain and more severe weather. Now, here's a picture of looking at it from the side. You have the cold air masses moving along here. Now, cold air wants to stay down because it's heavier, it's more dense. But the warm air will rise up over it. In other words, the cold air acts like a wedge and pushes underneath the warm air mass, and the air in the atmosphere cools 1 degree for every 1,000 feet, approximately. 1 degree for every 1,000 feet. So all the moisture that's contained in the warm air, as it rises, the warm air can't hold that moisture anymore because it's getting cooler, so it rains. That's what causes our rains, and that's what the frontal systems do. Now, a warm front is a little different, but more or less the same, except that in this case, the warm air is the one that's moving, and as it comes to the cold air mass, it has to rise, and it goes up over the air because the cold air sticks down to the ground, and the warm air is easier to rise because it's lighter, and so it goes up there, and as it goes up, it gets cooler, and it can't hold the water anymore, and so it rains. Now, sometimes you'll hear in a forecast. In fact, I heard one here some months ago. It was interesting. They said on the radio that it was going to rain in the early afternoon. The rain would be turning to sleet in the late afternoon, and it would be turning to snow in the evening. Now, why is that? It's because you had a cold air mass moving across the earth, and say you're here. As it moves across, first of all, the warm air is being pushed up, and the water vapor condenses out of it, and it starts to rain. Then as the cold mass moves in and the air cools, it then turns to sleet. And as it continues further and gets even colder, there's less mixing of the warm and the cold now, you get snow, because now the temperature was right for snow to occur. That's why you get all three of them, usually in that order and progressing just like that, and that's what causes it. I was driving in North Carolina one day, and folks, let me tell you something. I've noticed a long time ago, there's a lot happens in life around us, and if we don't get attuned to what's happening around us, very, very interesting things happen. Exciting things sometimes happen, and I can tell you a story about an experience I had once that really taught me this in a wonderful way. But we need to keep our eyes open and see what's happening around us and watch, because you see these wonderful things happening, and you learn from nature, and you learn from things. You learn these lessons, object lessons, very often about the plan of salvation and God's way of relating to us. And what we're talking about this morning was just graphically illustrated to me once. I was driving in North Carolina, just dropped my daughter off at camp, and I was going back to Tennessee, and I noticed that the clouds above me were very, very dark, like this. I was driving quite slowly, actually, because the actual visibility was pretty bad. As you can see here, it was kind of dark. And cars were driving with their headlights. And as I was driving, this front overtook me. And it got like that. Now, I wanted to keep on taking a progression of pictures like this, but at just beyond this point, when it got just beyond this point, it started to rain, and it was pouring with rain. I mean, I could not even take a picture. I stopped actually, but I could not get out and take a picture. It was raining so heavy. I could not take a picture through the windshield because it was just water. There was no way. And the windshield wipers would not keep it clear long enough for me to take a picture. And I didn't want to get the camera wet either, so I didn't want to get out of the car. So anyway, I had to wait a little while. Now you can see, if you look very carefully, you can see this picture, the windshield is still very, very wet. But I was able to wait a little while and take this picture as the front passed on. And you can see here the rain, very, very heavy rain was ahead of me now, and it had passed over the top of me, and then I was able to go on. But I took those pictures because it was just such a classic example of frontal passage, and I managed to take those 3 pictures in sequence. Now let's talk about clouds for a moment. We were talking about rain. Let's talk about clouds for a moment. Now notice that clouds have Latin names according to their type. Cumulus are heaped clouds. Those are those fluffy, pretty clouds that you see all like bunches of wool up in the sky there. Cumulus, in English we get the word accumulation. An accumulation of circumstances resulted in something. An accumulation means a gathering together or a heaping together. You can accumulate wealth or possessions or something like that. All comes from that Latin word cumulus, which means heaped. Stratus, we have different stratas in society. You have the rich, you have the middle class, and you have the poor. 3 different stratas in society, because stratus is the Latin word which means a layer or a covering. Now that describes a of cloud as well. Now cirrus is the Latin word that describes a girl's lock of hair. You know, a girl will have a little quiff, or that's what the word is that describes that in Latin. A cirrus. Now, nimbus is the name in Latin for a dark storm cloud, and alto, we know altitude is how high a thing is, has to do with its height. So you can put altostratus, would mean a stratus layer of clouds high up, and I'm going to show you some pictures in a moment to illustrate this. So that's how we actually get the names. And you can have cumulonimbus, which means it's a rain cloud that is heaped up and it's got a lot of vertical development. So that's how these clouds get their names, and there are some examples. This is a scattered cumulus. You can see they're heaped clouds. They're little lumps of cloud, and they're scattered because there's large areas between them. What causes that is you'll have say for instance, a factory with an iron roof, and the sun beating down on the iron roof will heat it up, and it'll cause the air over it to rise, and it takes it up. And when it gets to the dew point level, it'll come out and form clouds at whatever level it is. If you're flying in a light aeroplane, and Dave will attest to this, and you're underneath that, it can be a very, very bumpy ride. If you see clouds like that and you're in a light aeroplane, you need to get on top because the air is smooth above that layer of clouds. Cumulus, stratus, and cirrus clouds, all 3 together. You've got some cumulus clouds down here which could almost pass the stratus, but they actually stratocumulus, I guess you should really call them. Then there's some stratus layers up here, and there's a bit of cumulus there, and some cirrus right up in the top here, some wispy cirrus clouds all there in the same picture. Typical cumulus and stratocumulus. You see stratocumulus here like this, a cumulus attached to the top of them, and some stratus and some layered clouds there, and you've got some stratocumulus and cirrus all in here, same idea, stratus clouds with some cumulus showing through, and some cirrus clouds up at the top there. Typical stratus clouds coming off Lake Michigan here. This was taken in Berrien Springs at the airport. Just over my aeroplane there was all these stratus layers of clouds. Here's a layer of stratus seen from above, and this is what it looks like. It looks like just a white carpet, if you like, or a white surface underneath. This is also taken from my aeroplane, and now this is a little bit deceptive, but these stratus clouds were very, very high. They were just way up there, and I took this picture from my aeroplane just to illustrate stratus cumulus clouds over there in the distance over Lake Michigan. Now, sometimes we walk around with our head in the clouds, and we don't even realize that we are, but fog is just low-level stratus. Fog is just a cloud, a stratus cloud that's way down on the ground, where the conditions in the atmosphere are right to form a stratus cloud. There it is. And it's right down on the ground. So we can walk around on this earth with our head in the clouds and not even know it. There's some cirrus clouds, typical. You can see the little wisps coming off them. That's typical cirrus clouds. Now, I want us to notice something here. And that to me, when this struck me, these concepts that we're talking about here with science, when this struck me, and I saw this, I said, wait, this brings up a whole new dimension of my understanding of God and His involvement in this earth. Notice what this text says here. For He draws up drops of water, which distill as rain from the mist, which the clouds drop down and pour abundantly on man. Indeed, can anyone understand the spreading of clouds, the thunder from His canopy? I want you to notice something here. What you're seeing outside there today with the rain coming down outside there is not just a atmospheric phenomenon. It's not just a natural occurrence because the conditions in the atmosphere happen to be correct. God is in control of what is happening right now outside there with the rain coming down. God is in control of it. For He draws up drops of water. He is the one who does this. He does it through nature, correct. But nature is not God, but God does operate through nature. That's what we need to understand. It's not if you want to believe that nature is God because it's doing that, then you are a pantheist, and we know that that is not true. But what we want to understand absolutely conclusively, and I want you to take this away with you this morning, is that God is in control. You say, well, how come a tornado goes through a town or something like that and kills 12 people? You must remember that there's another power at work there, and I just want to put this to you. If God did not control these things, we would not even be in existence anymore. Satan would have destroyed us a long time ago. He would have had the power to completely pervert the natural occurrences, what we call natural occurrences, but God keeps His hand on it, and He is still in control. And yes, He is allowing a lot of bad things to happen because He wants us to understand what would happen if Satan was given rule of this earth. But He still has ultimate control, and He is in control of the elements. Now here's some ominous storm clouds. When you see these, you know, oh boy, we're going to have some rain and lightning and thunder and all kinds of things. Now look at this verse. And folks, this is the point. What the Word is telling us here is that this is just not when the conditions are just right, oh boy, there's a flash of lightning. He, that is God, looks to the ends of the earth and sees under the whole heavens to establish a weight for the wind. And let's just stop there for a minute. Do you know that the atmosphere has weight? Do you know that the air has weight? In fact, just imagine a square inch on the surface of the ocean, a square inch. And you take that square inch as a column, square inch around, roll the way up to the edge of the atmosphere there. That square inch on the top of the surface of the sea would weigh 14.7 pounds. That's the weight of air, 14.7 pounds per square inch. And the Bible, long before men thought these things out and decided with science how to calculate this stuff and to know this stuff, said that God, He establishes a weight for the wind. They knew this. How did they know that? How did Job know that to say that? Because that's what God has told us. He's revealed it to us. He establishes a weight for the wind and mete out the waters by measure. Why is it that in a pond, if you have a pond, the water comes up and it fills so far, and it's meted out by measure? Because God made it that way, and He controls it that way. He upholds all things by the word of His power. Everything in nature stays in its order and does these things that we're looking at this morning because God is in control of it, and He keeps it that way. By the way, I'm going to ask you a trick question. Just imagine you have a lake. It's about 100 feet long. You know, it's not exactly a square, but it's about 100 feet long, and the edge comes around. It's about 60 feet wide. I'm going to ask you a question. Is the surface of that lake perfectly flat? I want you to think about it. It's not perfectly flat, no, because it takes the curvature of the earth. Now, when we look at it, we may not be able to see it, but if you could take very, very accurate instruments, you would notice that the surface of that lake is slightly curved, and at each end of its 100-foot length, and at each part of its 60-foot width, it would be just slightly curved, because it takes the curvature of the earth. Because every part of that water has to be the same distance from the center of the earth as the other part of the water. It's a trick question. Very often you ask people and they say, well, yeah, it's flat. No, it's not. That's why the oceans are curved, because they go around the surface of the earth. Just a little interesting little bit of trivia there. So, okay, let's have a look at some of the power of lightning now. And I just want you to think about this. Just think about what you're seeing and think about the awesome power that there is in lightning. And it's a beautiful illustration, as this little video is going to demonstrate. It's going to show to you when you actually see the awesome power that there is in a strike of lightning. It's just interesting when watching that movie. It reminded me that when I was at Little Creek, there was some folks, they'd lived in a house that was about probably 200 yards from where I live. And one night there was this tremendous storm, and I was kind of woken up by the thunder. But you don't think much about it. It's a storm. Okay, so it's storming. I'm in bed. This is about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'm in bed, and I'm kind of like just half asleep in that. And the next thing is, the whole room was just lit up with this blue. It was just like this, blue, and it made a noise, a crackling noise, and there was this tremendous crash of thunder that went along with it. And I thought, oh my word, wonder what that hit. But that was awful close. I found out the next day it had hit that house about 200 yards from my house. And this is what in the room that I'm sleeping in, it was all this blue. It was just static electricity. I felt like my hair was standing on end and everything. But what happened is it hit that house. It actually hit a tree next to the house. It made a cut all the way down the side on the bark. You could see where it was actually sliced. Hit the ground, tore up a furrow in the ground, and then hit a metal thing that was in the carport, broke the windows in the back of the car on the one side and the back. The rear windows were both shattered. They were broken. It hit the car. There was burn marks on the car. Then it went into the house, and folks, I went into that house and saw it afterwards. I could not believe my eyes. And those people were sleeping at the far end of the house in the bedroom. There was a wall that separated where the steps that went down into the basement. It had a Michigan basement, and there was a wall there between the two. That lightning bolt totally destroyed that wall, and the pieces of it were lying down in the basement. You could actually stand there and see where the wall was. It was right down in the basement there. It destroyed the countertops in the kitchen, went into the living room, and the lady had a cabinet with all kinds of like prized china in it, totally demolished, every last bit of it. It was just a heap of rubble lying on the floor, and it stopped just outside their bedroom door. When I looked at that, I thought, oh my, this is the power in a bolt of lightning? Incredible, absolutely amazing. But that's what it is. God controls that kind of power. He has that kind of awesome power to be able to create something like that, but then also to control it. Sing praises on the harp to our God, who covers the heavens with clouds. Who covers the heavens with the clouds? Is it just some kind of a natural atmospheric phenomenon? No, He does. He upholds all things by the word of His power. Who prepares rain for the earth? God is the one who's in control of all this. He does this. By the way, you know where that is, right? Banana Point. I took that down there last year sometime when I was down there, and it was actually raining at the time. You can't see it too well, but I was outside standing in the rain taking a picture of it. So it was raining at the time, but that's why I took that picture. Now, here's interesting. You're looking at a Pacific Northwest storm that was back in 2010, if I remember rightly, if I believe it was right, taken from a satellite. What we've been talking about is the systems. You see it, the curving here, curving right in. So the low pressure system is right in there. The low pressure region is right in there. And you can see it's going counterclockwise, so it was a low pressure region. And there you can see typical storm looking at it from the top. And as the air comes in here like this, it's rising, and then it can't hold the moisture, so it forms clouds, and ultimately underneath it was raining at the time that this picture from the satellite was taken. That's over the Pacific Northwest. I thought you'd be interested to see that. Now, let's talk about storms. This is interesting. You can see here a storm forms when there's a lot of vertical movement. And you can see the wind is blowing in this direction because it's pushing the clouds along this way. And notice this. There's an anvil beginning to form. So this is a storm in the beginnings, at its very beginnings. A storm cloud is beginning right there. And you've got a lot of cumulonimbus here. You've got a lot of upward movement. Ideal for the formation of a storm. And there's the anvil. Now, when you see something like that, especially if you're in a light aeroplane, you don't go anywhere near that thing. I'm going to tell you next week about what happens if you're too close to one of those. Personal experience. Next week. That's coming next week. So you get an anvil cloud here, and you can see which way the wind is blowing. It's blowing from over there, and it's coming this way. And it's forming this big anvil here, and there's probably very, very heavy rain down the bottom there, and a lot of gusty wind down there, because you have a storm in progress. And this is the anatomy of a storm. You've got the warm air, it's like a warm front here, and it's coming up, it's rising. And the cold air is coming down this way because it's heavier, and it's forming these gust fronts. Now, these gusts can be tremendous. If you get into one of these very heavy storms like this, sometimes you can see the trees are bending over like this. It's because the colder air is coming down, and it's being pushed away by the warm air, and it's forming these extremely strong winds. These can be 20 miles out here from the center of the storm, and you can still have hail coming out of here. When the air gets up high enough, if it gets cold enough, you can actually get hail still coming out of here. So if you're in a light aeroplane particularly, even the heaviest, they do not fly under here. You do not get under there. It can be extremely dangerous. Now I want you to see something, folks, that makes me admire you men that love to be out on the boats. I'm going to show you something. When I look at that, I'll say, I'll watch. I'll watch from here if you don't mind. I'll see a video, but I'm not sure that I would want to be out there. But you can watch this and see. You been in that before? Not me. That to me is utterly incredible that you guys would even go out in the boats when it's half of that. I mean, but look at that and I say, that is absolutely outrageous. It's unreal. I don't know what I would do if I was in a boat like that. I'm not a seafaring person. Put me in an aeroplane and I'm happy, but in a boat, and when I see that, I say, okay, guys, I think you can have that for whatever you want. But I want you just to think about something for a moment. You're sitting in a skiff, okay? You're sitting in a skiff, and you take your hand, and you just do this with the water as hard as you can. Just do that. And what's going to happen? You get a bit of water will spray out there like that, and within a few seconds in that, the water goes back like you ain't even touched it. Look at that. Compare that with that. When you've got a whole ocean out there, and yet the wind that God controls can just churn up the sea like that and make it do that. Look at that. What kind of power is that? That God controls that. And when you would have to struggle to just make a splash, and here He does that. Just the other day, about 2 weeks ago now, I happened to be out at the post office, and I happened to look up over Frederick Sound area there, and I saw this beautiful rainbow. It was right across the sky. I don't know if any of you saw it. It was right across the sky. So I quickly, when I'd finished my business, I went down to Lookout Point there, and I took this picture. Actually, I took pictures of the whole thing, but I couldn't get the whole, it was too big. I couldn't get the whole thing into one picture, so I took pictures of it, and this was the brightest and the prettiest part. That's the Frederick Sound over there. Now notice this, what God says. It shall be, when I bring a cloud over the earth. Now, who brings the clouds over the earth? Do they just happen? No. God says, when I bring a cloud over the earth. He's the one who does this. Then the rainbow shall be seen in the cloud, and I will remember my covenant which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. The water shall never again become flood to destroy all flesh. The only way that He can make that promise is if He controls it. That's the only way. God could not make that promise if nature had its way and was going to destroy the earth by a flood anyway, whether He said so or not. No, God controls it. And He has told us that never again will the waters overflood the earth and kill everybody, because He's promised. And what He put in the heavens there, in the clouds, to remind us every time we see that, is that He will never do that again. And that is just, to me, is an indication when I see the rainbow like that, I say, yes, God is telling us that He lives and He is in control. That's what the rainbow tells me. God is in control and He's very much alive. How about this? I didn't take this picture, but oh my. Your mercy, O Lord, is in the heavens, and your faithfulness reaches to the clouds. For your mercy is great above the heavens, and your truth reaches to the clouds. Just something I want us just to point out about this. I don't remember exactly who there was that took this picture, but anyway, it was kind of like an anonymous thing that I picked up on the internet. And apparently it was natural. It was a natural formation of clouds. But the reason why God does this is He wants us to remember that He has purchased the right to control the elements on the cross. He purchased the right to control all of the elements and all of the storms and rain and sea upheavals and lightning. On the cross of Calvary, Jesus purchased the right to keep those things in control, not to destroy us. The heavens declare His righteousness, and all the people see His glory. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth. Now this is something to me where God has planted His cross in the clouds too, to remind us that, hey, with my cross, I've purchased control over all of these things. And I only let them go so far, just so that you can see what would happen if Satan was to get control of this earth. Look out, that's what would happen. But His cross has purchased the right to control all of these things. Now, why have I told you all of this morning? Because I want you to understand the power, the awesome power. I mean, we cannot even begin to fathom the power of God to create all these things and to be able to control all of these things, which to us, that's lightning. When I look at that lightning, I say, wow, think of the power in that bolt of lightning that's coming down there. And when I saw with my own eyes what just one bolt of lightning can do, when we think of that awesome power that God has, I mean, it's absolutely way beyond our comprehension and our understanding. And yet He controls that. He's in control of that. Now, there may be somebody here this morning, there may be somebody listening to my voice on the radio, I don't know, who's going through some really traumatic experience in their life, a time of real turmoil, trouble, maybe some very, very important decision has to be made, something that is really a burden or a problem or a trial to that person. If you're listening, I'm addressing you. I want to talk to you personally and very, very sincerely. God has the power to control. God is ultimately in control. Don't think that there is anything that can come upon us, any trial, any disease, any persecution. There is nothing that can invade our space, our living space, that God cannot control. Now, He doesn't always just remove the circumstances or take the trial away, but He does give us the strength to go through it. He gives us the strength to hold on. He gives us the strength. Ultimately, His purpose will prevail in whatever that thing is. His purpose ultimately will prevail. And when we look back over it, we'll say, well, thank you, Lord, for bringing me through that, because my faith is just so much stronger, and I know that you are in control of my life. Now, there's a very, very interesting story in the scriptures that demonstrate this. When Jesus was asleep in the back of the boat with his disciples, and the sudden storm, tempestuous wind came up, and they forgot that he was in the boat. And when they came to the place where they could not save themselves, it says they could not save themselves. They'd come to the end of their tether, and the boat was about to be overwhelmed. They remembered that Jesus was in the boat. And they woke him up, and he stood up and said these immortal words, "Peace, be still." And I want to play you a piece of music this morning, and I've entitled it "Peace, Be Still, the Storm on the Lake." And it's a descriptive piece which describes this very incident, the storm on the lake. So I'm going to play that for you now, and I hope you can enjoy it. Father in heaven, we are so encouraged when we realize that you are indeed in control of everything, control of nature. And when we see the awesome power that you do control, it just gives us the confidence to know that no matter what life throws up at us, that you are more than capable of seeing us through, giving us the strength, giving us the wisdom, and giving us the courage to go through whatever it may be that comes our way. Now may that amazing, amazing love that is enshrouded in that power of the Father who gave the Son with amazing grace that is bestowed upon each one of us, and that awesome power which controls even the waves and the wind and the rain and lightning, the awesome power of the Holy Spirit which is shed abroad in our hearts to give us that confidence and that assurance. May all that God implies and all that He is, may it be to each one of us with our heads bowed here today, during this coming week and throughout the ceaseless age of eternity. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.